All right, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Everybody's here. Sorry, I was a few minutes late, just waiting on something to happen here on the computer so we don't get a problem like we have last couple of times. Hope everybody's doing all right. We're almost finished with this book. This is the second half of our chapter of Moses, which we're going to read alongside today with a very short chapter of Khalid. So let me just get to where we ended last week. First, by taking a sip of this coffee here, and we shall get cracking. All righty, here we go. From where we left off. Consider then the perfection of these two men in knowledge, in their maintaining of the divine properties, as also al-Hikam impartiality in recognizes Moses' rank when he said, I have knowledge from God that you do not have, just as you have knowledge from God that I do not possess. This concession to Moses' knowledge was by way of alleviating the irritation that had caused him by saying, how can you have patience with that of which you have no experience? While knowing the loftiness of his apostolic rank, which he himself did not enjoy. This is relevant to the community of Muhammad in the story of the pollination of the palm trees. If you recall, we read that in the chapter of Seth, where Muhammad said to his companions, you have more experience than I of what needs to be done in this world of yours. Although there's no doubt that knowledge of a thing is better than ignorance of it. God therefore extols himself as being knowledgeable about all things. Thus the apostle recognized that his companions were more knowledgeable about the things of this world, of which he had no experience, since such things are a matter of experience and direct contact. And Muhammad had no time for such knowledge, being concerned with more important matters. I have brought your attention to a way of behaving that will greatly benefit you if you train yourself to it. He also said, My Lord has given me an authority, meaning the vicegerency, and made me one of the apostles, meaning the apostleship, although not every apostle is a vicegerent. This is because the vicegerent bears the sword and is one who dismisses and appoints governors, whereas the apostle is not such, his only charge being to communicate the message with which he is sent. This is not actually a recognized definition of wilaya as far as Shia concerned, but anyway, we'll let Ibn Arabi have this definition here. If he should fight for and protect it by the sword, then he is both a vicegerent and an apostle. Thus, just as not every prophet is an apostle, not every apostle is a vicegerent, a wali, which is to say that dominion and rulership are not given to everyone. This particular point is one of the points wherein Sayyid Haydar al-Muli, in his very introduction to the commentary in the Fusus al-Hikam, takes Ibn Arabi to serious task. As for the wisdom implicit in Pharaoh's question regarding the nature of God, it lies in the fact that it was not asked out of any ignorance on his part, but from experience. You see how consonant his answer would be with his claim to being the Lord's apostle. Pharaoh knew well the rank of apostle through his knowledge of God, and he duly inferred from Moses' answer the veracity of his claim. He asked the question in a misleading way to acquaint those present without their knowing it, of what he himself was aware of in asking the question. And therefore Moses answered in the way of one who knows. Pharaoh, to preserve his position, pretended that Moses had not answered the question properly, so it might appear to those present who were weak in understanding that he knew more than Moses. Therefore, when Moses answered the question in a way that seemed not to answer what was asked, Pharaoh, knowing that he would answer in that way, said to his entourage, surely this messenger of yours is mad. That is, he's ignorant of what I asked him about. So he does not seem basically to know. The question was a valid one, since the question, what, ma, is concerned with the reality of what is sought, which must be real in itself. As for the imposition of definitions involving genus and species, they are applicable to everything that admits of such association. As for him who has no genus, his reality in himself must be quite other than that in any other. Thus, The question is a valid one according to the people of God, true learning and sound intelligence, and the answers to it could only have been the one that Moses gave. And this was the question, who is your God? And Moses' response was the Lord of the heavens and the earth and what is between them. And Moses could not have answered in any other way, because what Ibn Arabi is inferring here is that the Pharaoh was asking a question of definition. He wanted the had of God defined, and that is impossible to do. How can we get, engage in providing a had definition and limit, which is one of the meanings of the word had, to the nature of God. So the answer that Moses gave was the only logical answer that he could give. So then Moses pretended that Pharaoh pretended that Moses didn't know what he was talking about. Here is a great mystery, since he effectively answered one who had asked about the most essential of all definitions by couching his answer to conform with his own attribution of himself to the cosmic forms by which he himself manifests himself, or in which he is manifest. It was as if he had, in answer to his question, and what is the Lord of the worlds? He in whom are manifest the forms of the worlds, both on high, which is the heavens, and down below, which is the earth, if you are certain, or by which he is manifest. When therefore Pharaoh said to his entourage, surely he is mad, as we have mentioned, Moses explained further so that Pharaoh might recognize his degree of divine knowledge, although he knew that Pharaoh knew it already. Thus he said, Lord of the East and the West, Rabb al-Mashriq wal-Maghrib. So combining what is apparent with what is hidden, the outer and the inner, and what is between them, as in his saying, he knows everything. Also, he says, if you are intelligent, that is, if you are of those who restrict the intellect being restricted. In other words, Ibn Arabi is saying that no had definition in the way that the philosophers and peripatetics especially understand things, giving genus, species, differentia to any definition of God is a waste of time. So Moses could have only answered in the way that he answered, and here Ibn Arabi is now unpacking the meaning of East and West, right? A very Ishraqi definition where the East represents the batin and the West represents the zahir. The first part of the answer is for the certain ones who are the people of inspiration and true beings. Since he said to them, if you are certain. In other words, the people of inspiration and true being, it is as if he were saying to them, I have only informed you of what your inner witness and essential being have made certain of it. If you're not of this kind, but people of intellect, restriction, and limitation, then I answer you with the second part. For God is also present in your intellectual proofs. Moses showed himself in both aspects so that Pharaoh might know his virtue and veracity. Moses knew that Pharaoh was getting to know that because he had asked what God was, just as he knew that it had not put the question as the ancients did when they asked the question, what? Ma. Therefore, he answered. Had he thought otherwise, he would have regarded the question as mistaken. Thus, when Moses associated the one asked about with the cosmos, Pharaoh conversed with him in this fashion, unknown to those present. He said, if you have a God other than me, I will surely imprison you. Now, the letter sin in the word sijn, prison, is a redundant letter. In other words, he's saying, I will surely cover you. Jannah, confuse you, for you answered in such a way as to provide me into saying what I said to you. In other words, Ibn Arabi is saying if we remove the word, the letters S of the word sijn, to imprison, instead in Arabic we get the word Jannah, which means both paradise, by the way, as well as insanity. You might have said to me, O Pharaoh, you are showing your ignorance in threatening me, but how can you separate us, essentially seeing that the essence is one? Pharaoh is saying to him, it is only the ranks that divide the essence apparently, albeit that the essence cannot in reality be divided or separated. My rank now is that of de facto power over you. Although I am you, essentially, I am nevertheless different from you in rank. When Moses understood this, he admitted his right while saying to him that he could not do it, what he had threatened. Pharaoh's rank demonstrated to Moses that he had power and influence over him because God, in the outer form of the rank of Pharaoh, had power over that rank in which Moses was manifest in that situation. In other words, the conversation between Pharaoh and Moses becomes a conversation between two aspects of God. Moses then said to him, by way of resisting his threat, what if I were to present to you something clear and unambiguous? To which Pharaoh could only reply, present it then if you are truthful, in kuntum sadabi, lest he should appear weak and unjust to his people, who might doubt him, a people whom he despised but who obeyed him. Surely they are the evildoers. That is to say, those who refuse to admit that sound intelligence requires the rejection of what Pharaoh claimed with his words. This is because the intellect reaches a certain limit beyond which it cannot go, while one possessed of inspiration and certainty can proceed beyond that limit. Thus, Moses produces an answer that can be accepted, particularly by one who is certain and intelligent. So he can cast down his staff, which was in the form of Pharaoh's rejection of Moses in resisting a response to his summons. And lo, it was a manifest serpent. That is, a snake, unmistakably. Thus, the disobedience of Pharaoh, which is evil, was changed into obedience, which is a good thing. As he says, God changed their evil deeds into good deeds. That is, according to the divine judgment. Thus, the judgment is here manifest in a particular thing, in a single substance, since outwardly it is the staff and the snake. As a snake, it devoured the other snakes like it, and as a staff, it consumed the other staffs. Thus, Moses' argument appeared superior to that of Pharaoh, as symbolized in the form of staffs, snakes, and strands. The magicians had strands which are small threads, while Moses had none, which shows that their powers, in relation to Moses' power, was that of strands to huge mountains. When the magicians saw that, they became aware of Moses' degree of knowledge, realizing that what they had witnessed was not of a mortal doing. Or, if it were, it could only have come from one where knowledge is free of all fancy and ambiguity. Have faith, therefore, in the Lord of the worlds, the Lord of Moses and Aaron, the Lord on whom Moses and Aaron called. Since the magicians realized that the people were well aware that it was not Pharaoh on whom Moses had called, it was only because Pharaoh was in a position of power, the man of the moment and vicegerent by the sword, even though he had abused all legal norms, that he said, I am your highest Lord. That is to say, even if all be lords in certain sense, I am higher by virtue of the rule I have been granted outwardly over you. The magicians, realizing the truth of what he said, far from denying it, confirmed it, saying, you only judge in the things of this world, so past judgment for the state is yours. Thus is saying, I am your highest Lord. Was correct, since even though he was in essence God himself, and the form was that of the Pharaoh, by the divine essence within him, but in the form of falsehood, he cut off hands and feet and crucified people so that ranks might be acquired that could be acquired only by such action. Causes can never be canceled because the latent essences make them necessary. They are manifest in existence only in some form or other according to their latent states, according to what their latent states dictate, there being no way of changing the words or logoi of God, which are nothing other than the essences of created things. In respect of their latency in eternity, they are called permanent, while in respect of their existence and manifestation, they are called ephemeral. One might say that some guest has only just come to us today, which does not mean that he had no existence before his appearance as a visitor. Thus God in his mighty speech says, which means his sending it forth despite its eternality. Whenever there comes to them some new reminder from their Lord, they listen to it casually, or nonchalantly. And whenever there comes to them some new reminder from the merciful, they're turned away or aside from it. The merciful only comes by mercy, and whoever turns aside from it may expect the penalty, which is a lack of mercy. Now, let me stop here and make a comment. This is for all those people out there, and there's quite a few of them, and there's some recent ones recently, who think that what Wahdat al-Wujud represents is a kind of a hippie, let's all love one another and, let's all get along, and, anyone who hates or whatnot or, calls out bullshit is unspiritual. Absolutely wrong, right? The way that both the Quran phrases the matter and the way that Ibn Arabi is confirming the matter is that in the terrain of Tawheed and Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being, everything occurs. Everything occurs. So, and citing this verse, if the mercy comes to them and they accept it, then they will be dealt with mercifully. But if it comes to them and they reject the mercy or they conspire against it, then what is the consequence of that? It's wrath. But that is as a consequence of the phenomena that they themselves have unleashed by virtue of their decision. As simple as that. This occurs in the terrain of the unity of being because the being has articulations, and these articulations are animate realities, right? And these animate realities come in the forms of affirmation, yes, or negation, no. And each of them has consequences and a chain of causalities that follow from them. So this is an answer to all those dumbasses out there who think that, because I, for example, deny Zionist or, empire and that sort of thing, that makes me unspiritual because empire and Zionism also occurs within the unity of being. I didn't say anything differently. But the fact of the matter is that in every mode of approach by one of the articulations of being, which is each individual, there's a phenomena that proceeds from the noumena in relation to that action. It's as simple as that, which also tells you on one level that we do, in fact, there is a voluntarism involved within the larger determinism of the Tawheed. Okay, so that's an answer to that issue. Also, his saying, their faith will not avail them when they see our might, the norm of which God has been applied before to his servants, except to the people of Jonah, which exception does not mean that it will not benefit them in the hereafter, but means that it will not save them from blame in this world. That is the point. That is the point that Ibn Arabi is making. So the blame, right, can in fact accrue to a given people or a given actor within this very spatial temporal domain itself, because this plane is subject to these laws of causality. And this plane especially manifests the affirmation and the negation, the ithbat and the naf. So, to blame, for example, the prophets or a truth teller or vice versa for calling out corrupt people and saying, oh, you're against the oneness because you're calling things as they are, is the height of stupidity, not to mention arrogance. Thus, Pharaoh was taken or killed despite his sudden faith, which would also have been the case if he had been certain of dying in that moment. The evidence, however, indicates that he was not certain, since he watched the believers walking along the dry path that had appeared when Moses struck the sea with his staff. Thus, when he believed, Pharaoh was not certain of destruction, unlike the dying man who only believes, so that death might not touch him. He believed as the children of Israel believed, although he was falsely certain that he would be safe from destruction. When he was certain of what occurred, but in a form other than that he had wished for, God saved him from the punishment of the hereafter in his soul, and also saved his body, corpse. As he says, today we will save your body so that you might be assigned to those that come after you, lest his people should say that he had merely gone into hiding if his form had disappeared. Ibn Arabi is saying, yes, his life was taken, but his physical corpse was spared. Although dead, he was visible in his usual form, so that it might be known that it was he. He was thus safe both outwardly and inwardly. One who is condemned to be punished in the hereafter does not believe whatever sign he is given. until they see the painful punishment of hell. That is, until they experience the punishment of the hereafter. It is clear from the Quran that Pharaoh was not of that kind. We say further, but God has the last word, that although people think that he was damned, there's no text to support such a view. As regards his people, that is another story for which there's no place here. This has driven the Orthodox establishment across the board on both sides, Sunni and Shia, up the wall. This statement by Ibn Arabi right here. Know that God does not take a man who is dying unless he be a believer, insofar as the divine warning has reached him. For this reason, sudden death and the killing of a man unawares are abhorred, while in the case of sudden death, the internal breath escapes, but the external breath does not enter. This is not so with one who dies more slowly. It is the same with one who is killed unawares, for example, by being struck from behind. Such a person is taken in whatever state of belief or unbelief he is when he dies. The Prophet said he will be gathered in the state he was at death. The dying man, on the other hand, is aware of death and is sure about what is happening so that he is taken in that state. This is because kana, to be or become, is a word of being that is concerned with the extension of time only by association with states. A distinction must be made, therefore, between an unbeliever who dies in a state of awareness and one who is killed unawares or dies suddenly, as we have mentioned regarding sudden death. As for the divine self-revelation and its speaking in the form of fire, it occurred because of the desire of Moses. God revealed himself to him in the form of his desire, so that he might approach and not turn away. This is now a carryover from the issue of passion that we covered in the last chapter. Had he revealed himself to him in any other way, he would have turned away because of the concentration of his interest on a particular purpose. In other words, the Lord of the worlds will reveal itself to a Gnostic on the path in whatever is the form of their desire, whatever that be, and or focus, for that matter. If he had turned away, his act would have rebounded on him, and God would have turned away from him also. He, however, was a chosen and favored one, as indicated by the fact that God revealed himself to him in the object of his desire, unknown to him. In the poem, as with the fire of Moses, he saw it as his very need. Unknown to him, it was indeed the very God. And this was the chapter of Moses. Now let us look at the wisdom of, it's translated here as resource, and the other two translators translated differently. It's Samadiyya, Hikmat al-Samadiyya fi Kalimat al-Khalidiyya. They're using the word samad, or Ibn Arabi is using the word samad in its core etymological meaning, although in the Quran, and also the glosses on that word that you find in lexicographical dictionaries, samad denotes everlastingness. So it is the entire panoply of eternity. So all forms of eternity, whether we're talking about the pre-eternity, the post-eternity, the durationless perpetuity of eternity, all of these are summarized in this attribute of samadiyya, right? So that is why the Surah Al-Ikhlas, the 112th Surah of the Quran, begins, Qul huwallahu ahad, say God is one, Allahu samad, God is everlasting, right? Other translators I've noticed in the various Quran translation have kind of missed this particular point, but that is what what is the Quran saying? Let me just turn this back on again. All right, we're back. So let me just read this very short chapter, the wisdom of resource, or wisdom of the everlastingness in the word of Khalid. He says, the wisdom of Khalid ibn Sinan, who, by the way, not a Quranic prophet, resides in the fact that in his mission, he manifests the prophethood of the Ismas, the Nubuwwah al-Barzakhiyah. He claimed that he would reveal what was there at the Isthmus only after his death. It was therefore ordered that he be disinterred. When he was asked about the matter, he revealed that its regimen was in the form of this world, by which it may be known that what the apostles said in their worldly lives was true. It was Khalid's aim that the whole world should believe in what the apostles told them, so that divine mercy should be available to all. He was ennobled by the proximity of his mission to that of Muhammad, knowing that God had sent him as a mercy to the worlds, which is a bit of a prophetological contradiction, because in all of the sources, Sunni and Shia, the belief is that there was no prophet intervening between Muhammad and Jesus, peace be upon him. Although Khalid was not himself an apostle, he sought to acquire as much as possible of the all-encompassing mercy of Muhammad's mission. He was not himself commanded to deliver God's dispensation, but wished nevertheless to benefit from it in the isthmus, so that his knowledge of creation might be greater. His people, however, failed him. A prophet does not speak of his people as failing, but rather as failing him, in that they did not enable him to fulfill his purpose. Did God then allow him to achieve the fulfillment of his wish? While there is no doubt that he did, there is doubt as to whether he attained to the object of his wish, which raises the question as to whether the wish for something to happen is the same as it's happening or failing to happen. The word for wish here in the original Arabic is niyyah, which should be intention. In the sacred law, there are many instances that support such an equation. Thus, one who tries hard to attend the congregational prayer but misses it is rewarded as if he had attended it. Similarly, in the case of one who would dearly like to perform the good deeds possible to rich and wealthy men, his reward is the same as theirs. However, is the similarity in intention or in action, since they combine both intention and act? The prophet did not pronounce on either one of them. Outwardly, they do not seem to be the same. Thus, Khalid ibn Sinan sought to attain both the wish or the niyyah and its fulfillment, and thus reaped two rewards. But God knows best. Wallahu a'lam. That was the very short chapter of Khalid. Now we are on the final chapter of this book. So I open the floor to anybody who has a comment, question, insight, whatever it is that you want to talk about. Go for it. You don't need to raise your hand, just jump in. Anybody? Jeff, do you want to go first?
Not particularly. I actually don't really know what to say or ask right at the moment. I'm still finishing that chapter. Even though you finished it, I'm still reading it. And
Second one or the Moses?
no, the second one. Actually, I just got to the bottom of it. And no, I'm just thinking, and it all sounds good, and I don't really know how to begin a conversation. So I'll let somebody else maybe go first.
Hi, I'll bring up something Zachariah mentioned last week that I've been mulling over. So he mentioned the question of how do we bring our hearts around to accepting the fact that sometimes things are very ugly, but they're part of the being. And it just reminded me of what you were saying about how, you'll see these acts of imperialism or genocide or colonialism or every other sort of act of depravity, and to sort of see it as as another facet of being. I was wondering how much of that can be looked at in terms of I remember you talking about it there always sort of being like a tug of war between lordship, and I was wondering how the fact that mercy is meant to be the most transcendent of these lordships factors into all of this.
I look at it this way. I formulate the issue this way, and I'll try to summarize it here. I see the Gnostic, the genuine Gnostic, as also an activist in the world, right? So, in other words, if you are genuinely a wayfarer, you're also, at some point, you become the manifestation of what the Hadith Qurb and Nawafil says. Become the hand, the eye, the seeing, the ear, all of those things. So that means that you have a responsibility wherever an imbalance is present to balance that imbalance. Now, that is the neutral language around this, right? So that means from a metaphysical point of view, there's the reality of the noumena, which is Tawheed. But then there is the reality of the phenomena, which is the spatio-temporal world that we live in with all of its conflicts, ugliness, all of these things. We have a duty to put things in their proper place. On the one hand, indeed, mercy precedes wrath. On the other hand, wrath is also a manifestation of mercy in its place. In other words, that where abuse is occurring, perpetration is occurring, lies and deceit and all of that stuff is occurring, the Gnostic has a responsibility to intervene. Period. Right? And the Quran phrases this in the form of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy an Munkar, to enjoin the good and denounce the evil. Or, there's a lot of debate as to how the second part of this phrase is to be translated or interpreted. But nevertheless, basically, this is what the Quran itself is saying. Yes, Tawheed is everywhere. The Quran itself, beyond any philosophical or metaphysical speculation from Ibn Arabi or anybody before or after, the Quran itself is saying that, one of the names of God is Al-Muhit, the one that encompasses everything. So the one that encompasses everything, right, is also exceeding to the existence of tyrants, oppressors, corrupt people, all of that thing. The Quran is full of this and full of denunciations by the mouth of the Prophet acting on behalf of God of these people, whether there be the Qurayshites, the polytheists amongst the Quraysh. How many pieces of scripture do you know of, even in the Bible, that very unequivocally have the Prophet figure denouncing members of his own extended family, as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did with Abu Lahab? We have an entire surah of the Quran. Kappa yad Abu Lahab, made the hand of Abu Lahab shake, right? That's a curse by the Prophet of Islam himself against his uncle, who was an inveterate enemy of his mission. So we do have this responsibility in phenomena, and that is also understanding the difference between the numinous reality of things and the phenomenal manifestation of things. We in this world, in this dunya, we cannot escape that reality. And this is also one of the reasons why laws, ordinances, that sort of thing exist, to keep this balance and, prevent people from, eating each other, literally. If these laws and ordinances and balances did not exist. Okay. Otherwise, we know where that kind of stuff leads. And this is why this whole anything goes paradigm that you hear sometimes from these new agers and similar is nonsense, So we have a responsibility as Gnostics on the path, as true wayfarers, to intervene and get involved. So when we see, for example, tons of American bombs raining on the heads of women and children, 40,000 of which have now been killed officially, speculated to be over 200,000 other people under the rubble. If we sit on our hands and do nothing, not even raising a word, we are morally and spiritually culpable. We are failing our own suluk. We are failing the injunction to enjoin the good and denounce the evil. And all of this occurs within the Wahdat al-Wujud itself, within the Tawheed, right? Tawheed and the unicity of being does not mean this kind of monochromatic projection that certain people very mistakenly have of it. Being has articulations, and these articulations comes in very many forms. And if the lords, even a collective of lords, are misbehaving or acting badly, then your lord and that of others with you have a duty to set that other lord straight. Now, to these other people, your intervention might appear as wrath, right? Right? And it could even be manifesting in the form of anger, wrath, etc. But the fact of the matter is, if mercy precedes wrath, your goal of, righting a wrong is actually mercy itself in the garb of wrath. It's as simple as that. And this is a very fine line. But the Quran is, in my opinion, one of the solid testimonies to what I'm talking about here. And Ibn Arabi is saying exactly the same thing. Ibn Arabi didn't have a problem in telling off the kings and rulers and bureaucrats of his time. I mean, there are multiple places in his Meccan revelations where he's telling off uh, kings and sultans, other Gnostics. He calls the bureaucrats in Andalusia during the time of his youth ignoramuses outright. Insults these people. So all of this is present, and we also see it in some of the other, real genuine Sufis like Rumi. There's this famous poem of his that I once read in one of Salman Sheikh's podcasts with me, where Rumi is using, four-letter words to denounce a local enemy of his, right? He calls him a donkey's ass, and yeah. So, there is nothing wrong with any of this stuff so long as it is being done for the purpose of the good, right? We are not passive aggressives. This whole ethic of passive aggression is fundamentally what creates moral ambiguity, right? The whole point of a wayfaring is also to attain levels of higher and higher and higher moral clarity, right? Because that is the discernment that is needed to then put into practice and to be the nur in a terrain of zulma, even though within the zulma itself, the presence, the hadarat al-ilahiyah is there simultaneous, right? So the reality of wahdat al-wujud does not absolve any actor from not doing anything. In fact, Ibn Arabi is extremely critical of those Sufis who decide to leave society and go sit in a cave and basically leave humanity to their own fate. We know that ignorance, jah, is permeated within the society of human beings. We know that. But that does not absolve us from intervening in that situation to set an imbalance, to balance an imbalance. We have to do our thing. That is our obligation. It's a moral, ethical obligation. It's set out in the Quran, set out in Hadith, and on all sides of the equation. And yes, everything can also be won simultaneously within that greater ontological terrain. So the question is, you get the ontology right, but there's also a soteriology in the matter that needs to be very finely understood. And the soteriology of the matter is between good and evil, right? And the presence of God inhabits both, but the causality to bring one or the other into balance or imbalance is purely in the hands of those who have that clarity to either enforce one or the other. And unfortunately, in this current time that we're living in, even though with all the technologies and all the facilities and all the progress that are made, the mass of humanity look as stupid as they ever were. And so rather than a mass of humanity intervening in a genocide that is transpiring right in front of us of other fellow human beings, people are rationalizing or don't care or whatever, but not us. We have, even if we cannot physically do anything about it, we have a responsibility to open our mouths and say something and denounce the aggressor. This is one of the good things about Shiism, is that on this particular issue, it has a lot of clarity, especially in the practice of the tabarra, the disavow and disassociate, and the tawalla, the love towards, the Ahl Bayt, which is ultimately the love of God. So even within this terrain of tabarra and tawalla, it is very clearly understood that the mystery of tawalla and tabarra is actually an articulation of the mystery of the tahleel itself, the la ilaha illallah, right? So, the tabarra, the denunciation, and sometimes really hateful kinds of denunciations of the enemies of the Ahl Bayt that you find among some Shia, is about the love of the Ahl Bayt. It's about the love of God. And this goes back to what Ibn Arabi was saying earlier, especially in the chapter we read before, the chapter of Moses Luqman, where it's about passion. Passion comes, the hawa comes in these modalities and of intense love and hatred, right? I find it extremely bizarre that in this current timeline that we're living in, certain people, especially in the West and in various schools of psychology, look at these sorts of intense emotions as being bad things. This wasn't the case, at least with this world, in its highest philosophical and metaphysical and symbolic understanding of these issues. In fact, these intense emotions are actually proof of life, which is God itself. Does that solve your conundrum at all, or give a bird's eye view to things?
But yeah, that answers my question well. It's a very big way to digest because there's the understanding of it on ethical level as I am as an ethical agent, and then there's meshing it philosophically, and maybe some would say that's maybe not so important. What's more important is being a better person rather than being a coherent person.
I've had this conversation with multiple people in the past, with like, oh, why you're denouncing this? Why are you denouncing that? You must be a bad person. I don't understand your way of doing things. What kind of Sufism is it that wants to denounce? It's like, what kind of person are you that are sitting on the sidelines and not calling out corruption and abuse and perpetration? We have a I have a responsibility. And I take this responsibility very seriously. And any person genuinely on the path must engage in the same sort of thing. Where you see something off balance, wrong, being abused, being sullied, corrupted, that sort of thing, you must speak at the very, very bare minimum. This is the sunnah of the Prophet himself, peace be upon him. One of the commandments of the Fatimiyya Sufi order of the 19 commandments is to speak the truth, even if it be the acme of blasphemous heresy, right? Because, when you think about it, nothing can blaspheme against the truth or the truly real. Nothing, right? So, blasphemy is just basically in the eye of the beholder. But when there is kufr, real kufr in the real sense, in the sense of, covering up at work, and someone comes and denounces that kufr, right? They are not the blasphemer. Those who are covering it up are the real blasphemers. Whatever the other side says about, their antagonist, whether it be me or somebody else, right? So speaking the truth, no matter what. Yes, we engage in wisdom and tact and all of those things in their place. But when a situation gets out of control, like it is now in our world, then we have a duty, a God-given duty to speak the truth without pulling a single punch. You do the alley shuffle if you can, and just, dance around and beat them up until they fall, like Sonny Liston did in that second fight. Hit them with the phantom punch, but you hit them.
I find that the whole concept of morality itself, like the age-old debate between, good and evil, which is which, and how do you identify, and is there even any real distinction, and and is morality purely subjective, and is there any kind of like universal morality? And these questions seem to be troublesome to someone who's hell bent on empowering themselves. And it's
Yeah.
like to use like Rene Guénon, for example. Like Rene Guénon has written some pretty brilliant books, but he seems to be an example of somebody, despite his brilliance, wants to kind of just eschew the concept of morality, just push it off to the side because for whatever personal reason, it's like inconvenient and inconvenient truth to have to deal with these questions of good and evil and right and wrong. So it's better just to sweep it aside so that you can pursue your own single-minded agenda, whatever that
Well,
is.
this is one of the problems with the neo-traditionalist school in general, whether you're talking about Guénon or Schuon or the only exception to the school that I put is Kumaraswamy, because the man had a solid moral integrity. He did a lot of good, this guy. And in his place, he got up and opened his mouth against certain parties. The thing is, Guénon, in a sense, because of his approach to metaphysics, is kind of committing a fallacy in is that he is looking at metaphysics at such a high level of abstraction that he cannot see for himself the actual application of these metaphysics in the real world. Whereas with Ibn Arabi, that is not the case at all. When you read his Futuhat, it is so obvious that all these very high abstract metaphysical ideas were actually transpiring in the real world, in his ethical agency, in the real world. Okay? This is the difference between Guénon and the rest. Guénon is out to lunch on a lot of different things. He was brilliant. His books are great. I fundamentally disagree with some of his takes on things. But you see this then in the neo-traditionalist school, where they are trying to make a distinction between the people of works and the people of the intellect. And this is precisely the thing that Ibn Arabi criticizes repeatedly throughout his works, where you cannot make a distinction between these two. Because those who are, like Guénon, trying to be the people of the intellect alone are the very people that want to retreat from the world, look at all the pain, the suffering, and the lack of moral agency in the world as kind of already always, we can't do anything about it, so let's just retreat and go sit in our cave and just contemplate the beatific vision until we die, absorb ourselves into it ourselves. That's not how this works. That beatific reality is already within you, right? So if there is a tangible imbalance or something wrong in the world, you must intervene. That is your duty. If you are the hands of God, the eye of God, all of this stuff, then you must intervene. And when you are intervening, it is that divine will. It is that divine volition that is propelling you to do something about it. So if you stop yourself or try to rationalize yourself out of it, or then erect these, very intricate philosophical rationalizations about why you shouldn't, like the neo-trads have, then there's something wrong with that. And the result is, the proof in a sense is in the pudding. We see that what these things do in the outer world, where when we're not intervening, we're not engaging, where people are not taking their responsibility seriously, the world falls apart.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank you.
here's the question I asked one time of Alvin Moore. He never came back to answer me. Alvin Moore was one of the late, he died about 15, 20 years ago. I knew him when I was living in New Mexico. He was one of Guénon's translators. He translated Guénon's fundamental symbols. I met him a couple of times on the campus of the University of New Mexico when I was there, and then he invited me a few times to his home, and I met his family. And I put this question to him because he was getting there. When I was criticizing the world, and he was, why are you criticizing the world? I mean, look what Guénon says, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, wait a minute, right? If I come and pinch you really hard on your hand right now, what are you going to do? You're going to feel pain, aren't you? Yeah. You're going to cry out, aren't you? Yeah. You're going to try to thwart me, aren't you? Yeah. So, okay, there goes your argument. Unless you can completely shut out all physical pain, all of that out of yourself, at which point then there's questions about whether you're even alive. Unless you can do that, there goes your argument about, separating morality from the greater metaphysical perception of things. And you have to sit back, and I said, well, unless you have an answer for me right here, then you need to think about seriously that maybe Guénon got this wrong on this particular issue. Because this is not in evidence in the Quran. This is not in evidence in the Bible. It is definitely not in evidence in even the Eastern scriptures. You look at the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna tells Arjuna to massacre his own relatives because they have brought darkness and corruption into the land. There's not a speck of moral ambiguity on the part of Krishna in the Gita whatsoever, right? So this question, in my opinion, I've had to go back and kind of reframe the reasons why in our particular timeline there is this ambiguity on the question of morality when it comes to the question of metaphysics. And the answer, I think, is a lot more practical than certain people frame it. And that is because under this capitalist Anglo-European white supremacist world order that we have had since the last 500 years, morality is a hindrance, right? Is a real hindrance to its expansion and its want incessantly of exploiting the world. when you put red lines in place in the behavior and actions of people, they cannot enslave another people. They cannot, destroy the natural resources of our environment or steal the natural resources of one environment from one people and take it somewhere else. So that is why morality is actually one of modernity's most potent enemies. This is no one's ever articulated things in this way. Morality, however you want to frame the question of morality, whether you want to do it from the point of view of Sharia or the church or the Bible or the Gita or whatever, even from a point of view of secular morality, where you're just looking merely at causes and effects. Morality, when properly understood and contextualized, places limits. If morality didn't exist, nor would law. The whole process of enshrining and creating law in a given environment, or any society or anywhere, is precisely to codify a guiding morality of the behavior of people in relation to whatever object or subject it happens to be. So the argument, in essence, in the way that the neo-trans have framed it, is both counterintuitive and just wrong. Your acts, in a sense, also are the substrate in the matter in which you will then have vision of the higher things, right? If your morality is correct, if you have issues of moral ambiguity, then you're not there. You still have knots in your heart, and the whole process of the wayfaring is to continually untie these knots to gain more and more and more and more clarity. And one of the elements of clarity that we gain is by understanding the differences between things. Or to put it in the abstract language of Ibn Arabi and the Bayan, to understand the differences between the negative and the positive, the negation and the affirmation. This is an incessant process. It never ends.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. It was a great answer. I might as well just keep going here for a sec. I'm still stuck on the last sentence of the Dagley translation of the Khalid.
Yep.
Khalid.
Yeah, Khalid. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't pronounce those. I can't
Khalid
pronounce
ibn
that
Sinan.
properly.
Is this the last sentence?
Yeah, well, here it's I've always had a problem with the concepts of rewards and punishments. For some reason, the idea, the word reward bothers me. I don't know why, because I hate that people are motivated by rewards and deterred by the thought of punishment. I wish people could have, more natural motivations and self-imposed deterrence without having to worry about how somebody else out there. And
Well,
so
this actually is related to what the question, the issue I just broached. This is a complex question in itself, but basically, reward and punishment on a very surface level is how you establish at least the demarcations and the boundaries between one thing as opposed to another thing, and especially in human behavior and human action and morality. We cannot, at least in the spatio-temporal world, we cannot actually have a morality, and absolutely we cannot have law without some form of, at least, if not reward, then some kind of punishment. If you cross the red line, or if you're in your car and you decide you're not going to follow the traffic laws and you cross the red light, one of two things: you're either going to get a massive ticket if the camera picks you up, or another car coming from the other direction is going to crash into you, or if they don't crash into you, they're going to crash into the other cars and create mayhem. And then you are really in trouble because you caused a massive accident. So it unfortunately, in this world of spatio-temporality, of cause and effect, and material cause and effect, reward and punishment is an inescapable thing. But we can understand the nature of things, and as the more that we understand the nature of things, the more the effects of these rewards and punishment will have less and less effect, especially on a wayfare on the path. But when you have a collective of humans who are not at that level of understanding, without these rewards and punishment codified into law, the result is cannibalism. Social people will be eating each other in the streets. It's a deterrent.
No, yeah.
Even if it is
No,
a deterrent in a sense of kind of a mental sword of Damocles hanging over people's heads.
yeah. No, I understand that. I actually, yeah, I don't have a problem with reward and punishment in that, like in the framework of what you're talking about there. I guess I probably wasn't too clear. I'm just stuck on this idea. I'm looking at the translation now, where it would seem that it would seem that the two are not the same, which is why Khalid ibn Sinan sought to preach so that he could rightly possess a station which would unite the two affairs and thus attain two rewards. And just that little bit, thus attain two rewards. I'm still tripping on that for some reason, and
Well, what he's
I don't
talking
know
about,
why.
what he's talking about here, is not necessarily the reward. He's talking about the reward of um, this paragraph. He's talking about intention, right? The nia. You make an intention. My intention is to do such and such, but there are series of events that prevent me from doing it, or the people who were supposed to be involved in helping me actualize this intent, this nia, decided to drop me at the altar or whatever. So the question that is being asked is that if, and the positive answer that is being given, at least where the commentators are concerned, is that if your intention is at that level, right, you will have both rewards, the both rewards being your correct intention and in the sight of God as if you had performed whatever it was that you intended that couldn't happen. In other words, with Khalid ibn Sinan, he was a prophet, but his people rejected him and they failed him. But in the sense of what Khalid represents, from the position of God, the failure of the people is beside the point because his intention was good. And so that he had both the prophethood of the Isthmus, the Nabuwa al-Barzakhiya, as far as Ibn Arabi is concerned, of course, as well as the literal prophecy in being a prophet in the real world, despite the fact that his people rejected him. This is what Ibn Arabi is basically trying to tell us with this very vague way of putting it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sidi, I would like to continue exactly from this point. Let's say the success of intention and success of the action. Would it be correct if we say that in some sense this world is the world of justice, but the next world is the world of generosity and mercy? In this sense, that if it, for example, I want to build a house, and it doesn't matter at all how sincere is my intention that this house would be used to help the poor and so on. If I am not good builder who built the house according to the laws of physics and according to the cause and effect and so on, this house would be ruined
Hmm.
because I didn't build it according to the rules of justice, or let's say according to the laws of this world. That in this sense, this world is the world of justice. That if you want to have success, you should go according to laws of success, and it doesn't matter at all how pure and sincere is your heart. But for the other world, then because even, for example, you didn't have success in your action, but you did it with very pure heart, then Allah Ta'ala will give you the full reward for the purpose you had, which was the motive to do this action.
Um, all right. if we take this world as the world where justice manifests, and the next one as the plane of reward, right? Then the question arises as to the nature of the divine justice. And this is a very long, fine, nuanced, intricate debate. How does the divine justice manifest in this world, if this is the plane of the divine justice? I give you an example in Imam Hussein and his martyrdom and the Umayyad Caliphate, right? Now, people expect justice to be meted out in exactly the same manner as injustice was meted out to Hussein alayhi salam and his partisans at Karbala. But it did, even though a lot of the Shia, are still waiting for God's justice to fall on the head of the oppressors of the Ahl Bayt. The fact is, it did. Hussein and his partisans were murdered in cold blood in the plains of Karbala. What happens to the Umayyad dynasty? The Umayyad dynasty has maybe less than 100 years of life left to it after that event. Progressively, it is corrupted to the point that it is plucked very easily, right, out of power. It has to flee the Middle East and go into North Africa from a distant branch, which establishes itself subsequently over there. But even that, this doesn't last. And the Umayyads go down even into the histories of a lot of the Sunnis, other than, today with a lot of these Wahhabis and Salafis who are essentially Nawasib. But with the majority of Sunnis up until the modern world, even these people are looked upon as criminals and, murderers of the Ahl Bayt. So the divine justice occurred, and simultaneously the stature of Hussein as a martyr is raised. That to this very moment, over 1,300 years after this event, we are still commemorating that day and still shedding tears for that day and still condemning the oppressors of that day, right? How different is this from the crucifixion of Jesus in the mind of most Christians, about Jesus redeeming the blood of the sinners and etc., in standard Christian theology, with the martyrdom of Hussein and his partisans in Karbala. This is almost on a higher even level, because it is the victory of the victim over his oppressor, right? Complete victory so there is the manifestation of your divine justice. Even to the point one would say that the act of the murder of the Imam and his partisans at Karbala itself becomes an irrelevancy. It is as if God is playing out the verse, Makaru wa makarullah wallahu khairul makirin. They plot and God plots, and God is the greatest of all plotters. God, brought these oppressors, these tyrants, into the plain of Karbala to kill its own logo self, the Imam, the speaking Quran, and his partisans, the creme de la creme of our world at that time, and they murdered them. But Zainab survived, Zain al-Abidin survived, and several other partisans survived to continue the lineage of the Imamate and to be as witnesses to that particular event at Karbala, that to this day is a symbol, a motif of both tragedy, but simultaneously underneath of victory and the manifestation of divine justice. Every act of commemoration towards Karbala that is performed by every moment is itself a manifestation of that divine justice. Every curse that we utter against Yazid, Lanatullah alayhi, and the Umayyads is itself the manifestation of the divine justice. So the divine justice is transpiring in this world, right? The form of it may not look, to some people, they may assess it as not great, but from the point of view of God, is the appropriate response, right? And nevertheless, the justice has transpired. And many other events similar to that. The thing is that the divine justice has also a mind of its own, right? And certain acts that look as to us at some point in time as being unrectified are actually in the process of rectifying themselves. And there are timelines. God acts very precisely in the world, right? So there is no injustice as such that is left forever in that place. At one point, the spirit turns around and hands the justice back to the unjust on a silver platter. And it does it in a very merciful way, as we read in the very last part of this chapter of Moses, right? Pharaoh was compelled at the very last moment of his life to testify to the truth of Moses at the point of death. Even though he begged the God of Israel to spare his life, the God of Israel spared his life force for another plague. It did not spare him in this world. So therefore, God got out of this several different things. It got the belief of Moses. It got the belief of Moses of Pharaoh in Moses. It got the forces of Pharaoh and Egypt defeated as the Israelites escaped and went into Sinai, right? And it got that final testimony about the manifestation of the divine justice in this world by also mercifully getting the very antagonist itself to confess to the truth of the divine power.
And now going exactly to the debate between Musa and Pharaoh. Especially the two ayah in the one which says the Pharaoh says to the Moses, if you take another God besides me, you would be the present one, the Masjunin, and the other one that the Pharaoh says that I am your supreme Lord. If you would like to comment a little more from the aspect Sheikh Muhyiddin here, that the Pharaoh himself is speaking like one of the manifestations
Yes.
of God, which gives completely new perspective
Yeah,
to
no,
the.
no. This is what Ibn Arabi is saying. But like I remind you, the Pharaoh, just like Moses, from the point of the spirit, is the same. From the point of phenomena, is the difference, right? And this is where Ibn Arabi is talking about when he's talking about the difference between reality and ranks. From the point of view of the reality, it is the essence, the Ain Allah inhabits Pharaoh as much as it does Moses, but from the point of view of phenomena and the ranks, whereas outwardly in the word of the Zahir, Pharaoh, is the king, ruler. He has that, what Ibn Arabi says, the vicegerency, the world of the mulk, of the kingdom. Yet it is Moses in reality who has the Saltanat al-Batiniya. So God, his rank is now higher. But yes, so when Pharaoh says to Moses, Ana Rabbikum Allah, whatever the actual human intention of the Pharaoh is at that moment in saying what he says, right? Behind the human intention of Pharaoh, even probably unbeknownst to himself, there is a truth, and the truth is that God is the supreme Lord. He is his most high God. So even in Pharaoh's or Pharaoh's plot, it's still God telling Moses, "I am your Lord Most High." So that leaves Moses unfazed by the fact of what Pharaoh's saying, because Moses knows that, yeah, God is everywhere, including in Pharaoh. But from the point of view of phenomena, right, there's a dramaturgy here. There are moral actors and immoral actors here. Okay? So even though Pharaoh is a manifestation of Allah, just as Moses is and everything else is, right? But from the point of view of rank, Moses' rank is higher. Even though, and from the realm of the batin, which is the real realm of things, versus the outer zahir, which is where Pharaoh's power lies. So Pharaoh is a moment at that, not so much at that moment he is doing an al-haq without the intention of saying that, right? Because Pharaoh's material intention is worldly power, but this worldly power is basically underneath the spiritual power. So if he says, "I am your Lord, the Most High" to Moses, he's wrong, but he's simultaneously right. The La ilaha occurs from the bigger picture, but the illallah also occurs from the bigger picture as well. So this is also, there's a negation in what Pharaoh is saying, in that he is obviously not the Lord of the worlds, right? But there is an affirmation in that the Lord of the worlds is speaking through the mouth of Pharaoh at that very moment, because the Lord of the worlds inhabits everything, including the words of Pharaoh, including the intention of Pharaoh, whatever it is. There's no vacuum in existence. Just like he told us earlier in that part of the chapter, that in every category of understanding and definition, all the hudud that we are talking about in philosophy, all the definition, genus, species, differentia, etc., God is present. The Hadat al-Ilahiyya is present in every element of these. There is no vacuum where God does not exist.
And the next question about the explanation of the ayah, where it is said that God will replace their sayyat, bad actions or bad deeds with hasanat, with good things. يبدل الله سيئاتهم حسنات. About its meaning.
The meaning that Ibn Arabi is extracting from that ayah is very simple, is that for every evil sayyat that is committed in the world, that eventually, this outwardly is turned into good. Never mind that every evil in itself, right, already behind it, has that presence, divine presence in it, that will transform itself at some point in the future into the good, right? No matter what. Because fundamentally, the true substance of being is not negation, is affirmation. Even if we don't see it in the bigger picture, there is no such thing as vacuums, right? There is no negation that is absolute. And the Adam al-Mutlaq is no existent at all to even talk about. It just doesn't exist, period. It is not even a mumtane, an impossible, right? It's beyond even that. So wherever the presence of God is, which is everything and everywhere, everything that is in a state of disequilibrium at some point is brought into an equilibrium, and that is one of the meanings of the verse.
Okay, and the last one, when Khidr says to Moses that you know things which I do not know, similarly, I know things you do not know. Uh, Here, the thing which I miss, um, if we accept that Hidr represents more the Batini side and Moses the Lohiri side, doesn't it follow from this that Hidr should have the knowledge of Moses, but not vice versa?
Yes, that's actually correct. And here's the reason why. At least even from the point of view of this particular narrative and the Quran, according to Ibn Arabi, Khidr was aware of the fact of why Moses was put in the basket, right? What that represented. He was also especially aware of the fact that Moses's murder of that Egyptian was not of his own volition. This was the act of God through him. It's exactly the same situation as what the Quran says, you did not throw when you threw, right? It was God who threw through you. And what Ibn Arabi is saying, that Khidr had perfect understanding of Moses' inner situation in time, right? But Moses could not understand the things that Khidr was doing even though what Khidr was doing was exactly the same. And had Moses bit his tongue, right, and not said anything, perhaps Khidr would have revealed to him the parallelism in his own situation that Moses did not know, right? In those three acts that Khidr performed, the killing of the boy, the puncturing of the boat, the breaking down of the wall.
Okay, thank you very much, Sidi.
And there's a simple reason for this, is because what Ibn Arabi is constantly trying to hammer in is that the awliya and anbiya, doesn't matter, here they're the same thing, because they're wayfarers fundamentally, and they're constantly trying to be in a state of remembrance, whether known to themselves or not, they are taken over by the Spirit completely. You're possessed by God. And the more that is one of the meanings to the hadith Qurb al-Nawafil. So therefore, most of your actions, even if these actions appear to be amongst the sayyat, the evil acts, like for example, the killing of the Egyptian, are in fact the iradatullah flowing through you. That is God acting through you. So therefore, even though Moses repented, he did tawbah of his action of killing that Egyptian, right? Nevertheless, it was God acting through him. Just as Khidr's murder of the boy, right? That had he allowed that boy to grow up, per the story, he would have become a real burden unto his parents, because his parents were believers. If he had not punctured the boat, then a king would have seized that boat of that fisherman, and that fisherman would have been either killed or, fall into penury. And if he had, not torn that wall down, those two orphans would have not have found their inheritance. But the presence and these elements of God's causality through things are very, very, very important, because even though we are bound to causality, which in essence now establishes the basis of why morality and then law exists, God is beyond it. We are not. We're subject. This is part of the iftiqar of all created things in relation to God. God is not bound by anything. We are. And the reason for that is because we're bound to God. Now, that in itself is a long discussion, as to why, the spirit binds but is not bounded. That's a long, long discussion with many, many avenues and byways and etc. Yeah. But whatever is dependent, which is everything that is created, is bound to causality and to these red lines and boundaries of this or that, affirmation, negation, negative, positive, all of that. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, just say so, and we'll try to explore it further.
No, the answer is a good answer. You have uh,
Anyone else? Hossein, did you want to say anything? Can't hear you. Yeah, I think your microphone is not working properly. Bummer. Oh well. Yeah, that kind of stuff happens to me on a regular basis. The camera doesn't work, the microphone doesn't work, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. The internet goes out in the middle of our session, all that kind of stuff. So
A lot of the time when I have this error, on the left-hand side, there's a little arrow to select the microphone, speakers. A lot of the times because the wrong microphone's being chose or something
yeah,
like that. So you can try that.
yeah, yeah. You got something? Say something.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can. Good.
Oh, I just took it out and plugged it back in.
Okay, cool.
Okay. I was so I was thinking about the question that Pharaoh asks Moses and the two answers that he gives, and the way that Ibn Arabi interprets that as, I mean, well, it's in the Arabic of the Quran itself. The muqinun get one answer, which is the Lord, what is the Lord? Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth. And then Ibn Arabi gives a kind of theophanic interpretation of that. The muqinun are the people of inspiration and being. Yeah. And then the other one is, I mean, the active participle isn't used in the Arabic, but it would be like the aqilun, right? Those who use aqal.
Yeah.
And his understanding, I guess, is a broader question about his understanding of aqal throughout the Fusus, because for him it's always about, he says taqyid, so it's like delimitation or limitation, restriction. And he's going back to the root of aqal, like for aqala, to bind. And so for him it's restrictive. But when you look at the answer that Moses gives, that's supposed to be addressed to the people of aqal, it doesn't seem like a rationalistic, or like, I don't see how it's restricted. It seems actually kind of Gnostic.
Exactly.
The Lord of the East
and
West, and then he gives his own ta'wil, saying that's the Zahir and Batin. It doesn't seem like something like an answer that would be addressed to people of taqyid and aqal.
Yeah.
So it makes me think that it makes me wonder about Ibn Arabi's understanding of aqal, and if it's just like really influenced by the way that it was received in the falsafa tradition.
Yeah.
Like he has this negative connotation with aqal. It's like, oh, it's always like limiting and
great insight.
Rationalistic.
I know where you're going with this. This is an awesome, awesome, awesome insight, because like you, I have suspected for a very long time, because Ibn Arabi uses this word aql in several different denotations simultaneously without defining them. Sometimes he uses it in the way that the peripatetic Neoplatonic tradition uses it, which we know what it means. And then he uses it in a negative way that the Sufis take the aql. Then at other times, like what you just read, he has a very positive view of the act. What does that mean? And the only thing that can mean is in the same sense that we have in our hadith collections, awwal khalaqallah al-aql, and that is the nexal consciousness, the higher intelligence, that is such a central part of the metaphysics and soteriology of Tashayyuh. And this shows up. This kind of understanding of the aql does in fact show up in Ibn Arabi in several notable instances, one of which you just put your finger on. There are more of them that one comes across from time to time in Ibn Arabi. I've debated this with Akbarians many, many times, and some of them have kind of like, well, we don't know what to make of this, because you're right. This does appear to be like a very pristine Shia kind of approach to the question of the aql, as opposed to either a Sufi or a peripatetic one. So this is going on. So what some of the Shiite commentators on the Fusus have pointed out is that what Ibn Arabi is saying in relation to Moses is that Moses is coming from the position of that aql that occurs at the very first hadith of Khomeini. Whereas then, therefore, when we juxtapose the opposite, then therefore this contest between Pharaoh and Moses becomes that contest between aql and wajah, as we find in that hadith in Khomeini. I've seen this, and not just here, but in several notable cases in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah where Ibn Arabi does that. And no one, at least none of the contemporary Ibn Arabi scholars, seem to have any explanation for this. How is it that this is going on? Which, to me, and to someone like Korban, who was, and also Osman Yahya, who was very immersed in all sides of this literature, it is obvious to us that there is a crypto-Shiism to Ibn Arabi, and that what the Chotkowich is, and these Syrian Sunni scholars of Ibn Arabi like Mahmoud Ghurab are saying is not it's not entirely accurate, that Korban and Yahya were indeed onto something. That doesn't mean Ibn Arabi was an outright Shia, but it does say that there are certain levels of understanding, very deliberate deployment of terminology that harken back to this kind of understanding that we're talking about in a very direct kind of way, too, not by inference.
Thanks. Yeah, that really clarifies it. I guess I would still wonder about the use of some of these terms like taqyid and what else does he say? The intellectual proofs. I don't know. I guess the Arabic would be dalail or something like that.
Yeah.
Although that could also be meant in a. I think the sheikhis use it in
Yes.
higher registers too, so that could be meant in that way. But okay, well, thanks.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to say something? Okay, dokie. Well, if that's all she wrote for this session, let's start on now the last chapter of the Fusus, the chapter of Muhammad, which is the penultimate chapter. I utterly adore this chapter, and as you're going to see, this thing becomes overtly tantric, pretty fast. So, it is a great, great, great chapter, and he kind of leaves things somewhat in an aporia, but not really. So let's get started on this chapter. We will cover this chapter for 2 weeks. So basically, we only have 2 more sessions after this one left to this course, and we'll get back together next week, same time. So, Ya Uluwa, Ya Samadu.